Thames Crossing Task Force. So the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Peter Ward, the business representative, Laura Blake from the Thames Crossing Action Group, and Wesley Mercer, Thurrock Business Board representative. We're just still waiting on Councillor Chukwu and Councillor Piccolo, who should be with us shortly. So I'll move to the second item, which is the nomination of the chair. So have we got any nominations for chair? Councillor Byrne.
Not for me. I'd like to nominate previous chair, Councillor Massey, please.
Any other nominations for chair? So I'll take a vote. All for Councillor Massey. Raise your hands. Okay, so that's unanimous. So Councillor Massey is now the chair for the Lower Thames Crossing for 2021-22. So now we'll do the nominations for vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Councillor Byrne?
Mr. Kent again, as last year.
Any other nominations for vice chair? So Councillor Kent, if you could all raise, anyone in favour, raise your hands for Councillor Kent. Yeah, so then that's unanimous. So Councillor John Kent as vice chair for 2021-22 Lower Thames Crossing. So both, if you'd like to make your way up to the dais and take your nameplates as well, please. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for returning me as the chair of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force. It's a great honour. Thank you very much. Thank you very much as well for the nomination for vice chair, Councillor Kent. I know his experience will bring a lot to this task force. Going straight into the agenda. Minutes of the last meeting held on the 15th of March 2021. Is there any comments arising from the minutes? No hands raised. Would anyone like to second those minutes? Is that approval of the last meeting? Okay, those meetings be submitted. Moving on to item 5, urgent items of business. Not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening. Item 6, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? No declaration of interest. Okay, moving on to item 7 on the agenda, the economic mitigation list. There will be Colin Black and Chris Stratford to present, and then we'll be taking comments from members. I'll pass over to you, Chris.
Okay, Colin, do you want me to go again?
Yes, please, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, just to recap on where we are with the Hatch report, it was issued informally to Highways England back in November of last year, and it was published on the 24th of February by the council and included on its website at that time. Since then, we have held 9 meetings now with Highways England about the 57 measures, and it's been a slow progress, it must be said. And if I can just give you a sort of rough idea of how we're getting on, if I can just explain, there are 57 measures, but they're split into 3 groupings. There are 23 measures called direct mitigation, and they're likely to be mostly connected with construction impact and future proofing and one or two other items, and improvements to junctions. Then there are 12 what's called council-led support measures, and these largely involve Highways England funding parts of the council in order to help it get it through the DCO process post its grant. And then there are a further 23, now 24 measures related to what's called legacy. And that includes things like the A13 trunking, the east-facing slips, Tilbury Link Road, the Asda roundabout, etc., Tilbury Loop Line Bridge, internet 5G provision, public transport provision, passive provision for 2 junctions at Tilbury and South Ockenden. So there are now 58 measures, and for the most part, I think there are now 8 measures where the Highways England have said that they will not do them. Only 8. And some of those we may or may not be in agreement with. The remaining ones, there are still a couple of measures that will involve high-level political intervention, such as the A13 trunking and such as the east-facing slips. But the rest are in various stages of discussion. As to whether we're going to get success on all of those 50 measures is a matter for crystal ball gazing at this point. There's certainly movement on some of the lower order matters, and we're getting a reasonable measure of agreement towards those. But the big ticket items are somewhat slow in their delivery. We continue to have further meetings. I'm pretty certain that the portfolio holder and other parts of the council are also having high-level meetings with both DFT and Highways England. Colin and I have meetings regularly at various levels, and it is quite normal practice to go through a whole period of what ends up being brinkmanship in order to derive what you need out of a DCO and actually get it. And there are 2 stages to that process. There are things you can achieve before its submission, and the things that you can actually achieve during the examination. And those are a bit more limited on what you can do at this point. So we are trying to get as much agreement for as many of those measures before submission as possible. And we continue to do that. And hopefully we can give you a more detailed report later in the year. Colin, do you want to add anything to that?
A good summary, Chris. I think it's there's a lot of work ongoing at the moment to understand the finer detail and to discuss and flesh out the nub of the concerns and what an acceptable resolution would mean. So it's a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you both. Just one quick question from me before I hand over to the chamber. You mentioned there's 8 that Highways England mitigation simply, they said they won't do. Is that set in stone, or can we name them as they've said they're not going to do them?
Well, let me take you through them then, just to be on the. Let me take you through them. I'm rushing to get bits of paper ready. Just a moment. We've asked for smart speed limits to be initiated. Let me just find the detail. I kind of half expected the question, but just give me a moment while I discover it. Yes, there was one to use the construction phase as an opportunity to trial innovative forms of transport, public transport. Now, I think we're going to get a commitment for them to use electric buses for their own workers. But beyond that, which is a different measure, beyond that, they've said no. So the next one is smart speed limits that can respond to traffic flows and pollutant concentrations. And again, they've said no to that. It could be done through the life of the project, but the infrastructure needs to be capable of doing it. So it's an unlikely item. The next one is the hypothecation of the LTC charges. Now, for those of you that have been around in Thurrock for a while, you may remember 10 years ago, there was such a scheme for the Dartford crossing. And the measures were hypothecated, in other words, retained by the council in part at least. And then the current charging scheme for the Dartford crossing was enabled, and they're proposing to do exactly the same thing. And if we were to have any success at all, it would have to be a discussion with the Department for Transport, government, in order to do it. And it's a question of how much political activity do you want to give to this particular item, or would you rather give it to things like the A13 charging and the east-facing slips? So sometimes these things are a little bit of a trade-off. The other one is the Hall Road, which is...
Can I just ask, can we have the letters for these, like L7 or whatever? It's like difficult to follow what you're talking about. Thank you.
Of course, yes. The first one was M8. The second one was M12. The hypothecation was M18. And the one I'm about to talk about is L3, which is about trying to make the Hall Road and the potential Tilbury Link Road one in the same. Now, it's an academic point now, because they're planning to take the Hall Road along what's called the infrastructure corridor from Tilbury 2 up to the point with Fort Road, and then eastwards along a private Port of Tilbury road, which has got a few doglegs in it, and then into the Hall Road, which is into the main construction site. In other words, their plan for their construction access from the port is unlikely to follow the line of the Tilbury Link Road. So it's fairly moot at this point. The next one is L11, which is the provision of worker accommodation that can be left as a legacy for Thurrock Council. They said they're happy to explore it, but they don't. Right now, they have provision on site for 480 workers within their current scheme. 80 are what's called hyperbaric. These are people that are working in the deep tunnel, and then 400 normal workers. And they are proposing any other workers to either travel to the site or to use local accommodation, and they're providing a justification within the environmental statement as to how that will not impact on the local housing market and the fact that the housing market can actually accommodate it. And the last one relates to L20, which is low.
Sorry.
Yep, sorry.
If you want to take questions at the end of these, when you've rattled, but these...
I don't mind, I've only got one more to go.
Okay, we'll let you finish.
Okay, L20 is the low emission vehicle usage targets with financial penalties payable to Thurrock in the event of an exceedance. And that was just a straight no explanation. So those were the 6 that they say they can't do.
So that's the 6 definite Highways England say no.
Well, that's what they've said.
Okay, I'll go around the chamber and then we'll see if there's any questions. I know there's a couple of members. Councillor Kent.
Thanks. Can I just explore the hypothecation issue a little further? I can't find it on here. I think you said it was...
I think it's M11.
M11.
Sorry, M18. My apologies. M18, I think.
Yeah, M18 is Alsip Cock roundabout mitigation. I can't find hypothecation in here at all. So I'm kind of really interested as to where it came from.
I don't know what document you're looking at, but M18 is the hypothecation. Alsip Cock is M19.
Could somebody else in the chamber have a look at M18 for me and tell me if I've just got...
I can say I'm seeing the same as John, that Councillor Kent, and M18.
Clearly we've got a version of this that has been edited, if you're telling me that on yours M18 is hypothecation. Hypothecation doesn't appear on here. And I'm really quite interested as to why it doesn't.
I agree with that as well.
The second issue is the one on...
Which report do you have, Councillor, so that I can be clear what it is?
It's Hatch LTC Mitigation Benefits, an executive summary by Hatch, October 2020.
Okay, so it's the short executive summary. Okay, let me just have a look at it on my screen for a moment, if you bear with me for a tick.
So there is a fuller version that wasn't given to members?
There is a full version, yes. It's about 120 pages. And it's published on the council website. And the version I've got shows M18 as the LTC toll hypothecation. So I don't know which version you have.
Well, somebody would have prepared and sent the papers out, so somebody will know which version we've got. This really isn't good enough.
I mean, I can jump in. So this is the same report that went to March's meeting, as this is a standard item on the agenda. So I'm not sure if this is a new version or an old version, but I can say that I'm having a look and it is, M18 is the Alsip Cock roundabout.
Okay. Okay. It sounds like it's an older version. I'm not familiar with what was circulated, so sorry.
Okay, but I think for me, hypothecation would be really important and gives us the opportunity to at least have a pot of money that we could invest into sustainable public transport and other mitigation, not just for the space of 2 or 3 years, but in the medium term. And I think that would be really important for this authority. So I would ask that that's one that we argue much further and much harder. We'll come on to I've got to find it. L11, the housing issue, and I was just interested that you were giving us some numbers of workers that might come into the area to build this, at the very same time that there will be tens of thousands of people potentially working on Paramount Park across the water. They're already talking about disused cruise ships somewhere in the Thames to house their workers. I'm really concerned that the area won't be able to cope with that number of workers. And it's not only about the kind of pressure it puts on local housing, it's the pressure it puts on all sorts of local services, whether that's health services, whether that's doctors, whether that's things like policing, as well as the impact on the local road network. So I do think that we need to be really, really clear how they intend to house that number of people whilst they're here working.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Muldowney.
I mean, I think every time this document has come to the LTC, I've asked for it to be updated and it's never been updated, so I'm disappointed about that. And I think really we should, if we're getting into the meat and bones of this, we should actually have the full document. Because I noticed the thing I always ask for is L15 to be updated, to include the additional areas, especially the ones in Chadwell, obviously, where I've got a special interest, and that's never come updated. So I have asked for that at least 3 or 4 times, I think we really need to be working off the updated documents. So if we could make sure the next time this comes that it is actually properly updated. Thank you.
Chris, do you think we could have that for the next meeting to make sure members have got a full report in front of them, bang up to date?
Yes, I mean, I'm not responsible for what gets circulated, but I'm pretty sure that I've sent through to Lucy a while back the link to the council website where all the documents have been published. I'm pretty sure that was the case. Can you just confirm that for me, Lucy?
I'll have to have a look, but I think you did, yeah. And if that's the case, then the ones that are published in future can be the ones based on the website, as long as the website ones are the ones that have been updated.
Okay. There should be. The date of the report that you have, I'm just looking on your website at the task force agenda. You've got the October version. The one we're working off and should be published on the website should be the November version. So that explains the difference. So we'll try and sort that out maybe offline, Lucy. Certainly, Councillor Kent, I'll take on board the hypothecation point, quite valid, and the housing question. Yes, we've already called into question the validity of their assessment of the impact on the local housing market and indeed on local services, because like you say, besides the 480 that might be planned to be located on the site, there will be thousands of other people involved in the project who may or may not need to live in the area, and the impact is unclear, I give you that. So we will make that point too.
Councillor Byrne, did you have a question? Anyone else with any other questions? Councillor Carter.
So I assume it will be in the more in-depth report, but M4 of the report, we've got install sensors to monitor air quality and noise with required actions if target limits are exceeded. I think it'll be really useful to have like the level at which that becomes like the maximum limit it can reach before action is taken and in respective measurements. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I can tell you that it is Highways England's intention, and it's a fairly recent intention now, to install both noise monitors and air quality monitors this year into a range of locations that the council will need to agree. In addition to that, we have been negotiating with them for what's called an exceedance framework. In other words, whatever levels are set as being you mustn't go beyond them, what happens if there are occasions, and there will be occasions, where those levels are exceeded, what happens? And we're trying to negotiate the process by which that's dealt with. So you're quite right to ask for it, and it is happening, and it will be, as I said to you in the briefing, secured in one of the documents so that we know that all these things are going to happen properly.
Anyone else with any other question? Mr. Muldowney?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, it might have been in the pre-briefing that we just had, but it might have been what you've just said. I'm not quite sure now. But for the first time, I heard you say that these 57, now 58 measures came out of the Hatch report, and this is what we were asking for. But for the first time, I heard you say to mitigate the economic effect of the LTC. So obviously that original document, Hatch document, showed, you know, a significant impact financially for Thurrock. So the question that I wanted to ask is, if we got all of these things, or all of them minus the 6 that you say Highways England aren't prepared to move forward Is that going to come to the same cost mitigation as the impact of the economic impact of the LTC? So do those two figures actually balance out?
I don't know the answer to that. It's a very good question, Councillor Nottolini. I will have to come back to you with an answer. If I can get the answer before the minutes, I will try and give the answer in written form to Lucy so she can include it in the minutes. Would that be satisfactory?
Yes, thank you, Chris.
Thanks. I suspect the answer is no, but I'll try and find out for sure.
Chris and Colin, just to come back on a point Councillor Kent raised, and I put a big star next to it, which is the provision of legacy housing. At previous task force, we've said about we don't want lots of non-permanent sort of caravan type accommodation popping up all around the borough, because as Councillor Kent stated, we already have got quite a problem with housing shortage and where to put people to live. And if you're going to inject thousands and thousands of workers into the local area, then the services are just not going to cope. So when they say that's off the cards, is there any alternative that Highways end up proposing? Or are they literally leaving it down to local authority?
No, what they're proposing is to use the 480 on the site, and then the rest will be sort of naturally split up into private rented, public rented, and possibly even purchased properties. So in other words, it will go into the local housing market to source and they seem to think, and I'm not sure they're right, that will have little impact. And I think Councillor Kent's absolutely right. We need to question it.
Absolutely. I mean, having lived in Thurrock all my life, much like many of the councillors and members of this committee, it is going to have an impact, without a doubt. There's lots of services now that can't cope. And like I say, you put thousands more people in, and it's just going to overwhelm a lot of systems that are already struggling. And the housing market, whether it's rented or purchased, is simply not going to be able to cope with the influx of that. So I would just like to put some more weight to that point.
When was it? It was about September of last year, and we received a document called the Summary of the Worker Accommodation. And it was a, 20-page document. And we sent quite a lot of questioning comments into LTC about it. And we haven't yet got satisfactory responses, and certainly haven't seen any amendments to their proposals. So this gives me the impetus to go back to them and say this is a key issue. So thank you.
Can I just ask, because this really does worry me. Clearly, that amount of people coming into the area, potentially taking what is a pretty low private rented stock, will push those prices up, making them more unaffordable for local residents. Can I just ask what the input has been from Thurrock Council's housing officers? What their view of that is, or have they not been asked for a view yet? If they haven't, I think it would be really helpful to get their input.
The Housing Associate Director at the time, she's now left, Carol Hinvest, was involved in commenting, as was her team. I'm not quite sure who's involved in that now. I can certainly find out, or Colin can find out with me, so that we go to the right people. But I mean, there will be a large proportion of people that will travel into the area and then travel back out of the area. They may not actually stay there, but we need to nail down the figures, and we need to nail down the proposals much more.
Go to Councillor Byrne and then Councillor Muldowney.
I'm just looking at L11, provision for the worker accommodation is at Stamford Hope. Does that mean we're going to have 300 workers trying to find accommodation in Stamford Hope?
Councillor, the origin of that, there was a piece of land near the station that the council owned at that time, and this was probably about a year ago now. And the idea then, by the former associate director before Colin, Anna Eastgate, the idea was that the council would offer that piece of land to enable them to build worker housing that could then be used for affordable housing once they're finished with it. But my understanding is that that piece of land is now no longer in the council's ownership and can't be offered. So that's why it was suggested there. I think that was historic.
Councillor Muldowney.
Yeah, just going back to the point of a lot of these workers are actually going to travel in and out. I mean, that brings its own problems. We've already got a road infrastructure that's under pressure in many different areas. So is that being captured elsewhere in the document?
Yes, there is another well, there's many documents. It's all very confusing, but there's another thing called I think it's called a construction framework travel plan, and we've had a draft submitted for comments. It's not very good, if I was honest. It doesn't commit to what it should do, which is to estimate the number of people that will be using private cars and then public transport, walking and cycling and horse riding if necessary, and what targets they're going to have over the years of the project in order to reduce the number of private cars coming in and out. It doesn't do that yet. So when we comment back on it over the next few weeks, we will make that clear to them. But right now, one of the ways to stop them doing that is to reduce the number of parking on site, for instance, and to provide proper electric buses to enable their workers to come in from railway stations and other central locations. And all of that will be part of our commenting on that travel plan. But you're absolutely right. It's not adequate right now.
Thank you, Chris.
Just to mention something based on that question from Councillor Muldowney, the recent planning application for a work site related to the Lower Thames crossing, I think that the councillors said the travel plans basically was the reason it was deferred. I don't know if you're aware of that decision. It went planning in the last 7 days or so. The travel plan wasn't adequate there, so it'd be very interesting to see the travel plans related to the actual site as well as
was
the
that
compound.
the Pilgrims? Was that Pilgrims Lane compound?
Yes.
Oh, really? Interesting. Ah, well, okay. Well, that further grist to the mill then. Excellent.
Got a question from Robert Quick, the People's representative.
Hi. I'm just suggesting, instead of updating this Hatch report from October to November, can we not update it up to present day with where you think we are with acceptance or otherwise of the 50-odd items?
Well, yes, we can. The report is obviously dated when it was published. It can't really be changed. We do need to update you with the most up-to-date version of when it was published. So that can't change. But what I did say is that a subsequent meeting, we can come back to you with a bigger update, an itemised update of the various measures.
Do you have any idea when?
It's difficult to tell. I would hope probably within a couple of months, perhaps, Colin, do you think?
Yeah, it'll take us a while just to make sure we go through and provide an up-to-date position that reflects where we think the negotiations have got to with Highways England.
The thing is, if this additional consultation is going to take place, whichever route it goes, whether it's the traditional method at tools that they hire or whether it's all done online, it would help the consultation if we know exactly where they're in agreement and where they're not.
Okay. Let us take that one offline, and we'll come back to you if we can try and do it quicker for you.
We've got the next. Obviously, this is a running item on the agenda. The next meeting's the 12th of July. So, if we could have an up-to-date list and maybe even and I don't know how easy this is practical to do, a bit of a traffic light system maybe, of green, amber,
Yeah.
red, ones that are in the bag, so to speak, ones that are 50-50 and ones that we need to discuss further maybe. A question from Councillor Muldowney.
It was a suggestion really. If the document itself can't be updated, can there actually be a written report that comes with it? Because we've had like a whole series of verbal reports, and you know, I do make lots of notes, but it would be really helpful, I think, for members, because it is so complicated now to have a separate report, and I would suggest that Councillor Massey's suggestion that that be rag rated would be really helpful. Especially when talking to residents about where we are with things. Thank you.
Yeah, that's certainly that was the intention to do in a couple of months or even at the next meeting. So, but yeah, I'll certainly make sure you get the right report first of all, and then we'll do the update.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone else inside the chamber? Councillor Chuckworth.
Just looking at L19, it's talking about the low emission charges. Is it going to be introduced in Thurrock?
Well, I don't know. You may or may not know, but about a year or so ago, the Department of Transport produced a draft decarbonisation plan so that in the intervening time until more or less now, they would have input from many, many different stakeholders, local authorities, Environment Agency, all sorts of different people who would comment on what measures might be useful and how they could be delivered. And it was due to be formally published by government in the spring. I think we're slightly beyond the spring right now, but it is imminent that this is produced. And once it is, it will include national measures. Now, how that relates to Thurrock, I don't know yet until we get the document. But if you were to go on Google and just put in decarbonisation plan, you'll get to the previous document that was issued just over a year ago.
Anyone else who have a question around the room? No, I think that's it. Thank you, Chris and Colin. Obviously, there's lots of things we want to come back on and look at further down the line in the coming months. And yeah, if you could prioritise some of the points raised, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay.
With that, we're going to move on to the work programme, which is the item agenda 8, pages 25 to 28, which is the last agenda item this evening. I'm going to jump right in here because I've noticed that the presentation from the Transport Action Network is penciled in for July. That's obviously a third-party group, and it's a little bit down based on their resources and schedule at the time, but we can certainly bring that forward if it's okay with them, so to speak. Before I go over to see if there's anything members would like to add to the work programme, which I'm sure there will be, is there anything you want to add to this, Chris or Colin?
Yes, I have, given that the next meeting is 2 days before the start of consultation, we have checked with Highways England and asked them if they would do a presentation to you all that explains what the consultation is all about, what the documents are, etc., etc. And Matt Palmer has agreed to be part of that, along with some of his staff. Is that something that I can confirm with him?
I think based on the timing, I think that would be yes.
I mean, it's the first time it's happened.
Yeah, then we'd very much like to invite Matthew Palmer to the meeting.
Okay, it'll be him and a few of his team, but so what we're trying to do is that plus probably this hatch report update for you and anything else you want on the agenda. So it could be a longer meeting.
From what I understand, and I need to confirm this, I think the Transport Action Network might be a little bit too early, so that might get moved along the work programme, but I'll confirm that with the organisation themselves. Like you say, with a more detailed economic mitigation list and a presentation by Highways England, that's already going to be quite a busy evening anyway. But I'll open up to members to see if there's anything that for the July meeting or meetings after that they'd like added to the work programme.
Okay.
Councillor Muldowney?
Yes, in light of there being a movement forward on the health impact, so there's a quality assurance review of the health and equalities impact assessment report, which was completed and submitted. I mean, obviously we'd like to hear about that, what was contained in that report, some details of the 15 shortcomings of the process from the points of view of the 9 local authorities, including Thurrock, that signed it off, and any response that's been received from Highways England. So I'd take advice on the best time for that to come. Maybe it's going to come in 2 parts, but I mean, I'd certainly like to hear as soon as possible about the actual document that's been completed and put together by us and the other 8 authorities in regards to that.
Okay, we can undertake to do an update paper. You know, at the March meeting we had the health update and we had the environmental update. Well, we can now do a further health update for you that sets all that out.
Thank you, Chris.
Just opening up again now. Anyone else? Chris and Colin, we've mentioned before briefly tolls, and I know it's not a Highways England discussion, it's more Department of Transport.
Yep.
But is there something that us as a task force could discuss and put some recommendations forward to the Department of Transport?
Of course, yes.
If we had that, maybe obviously not for July, but further down the work programme.
I mean, you know your procedures better than me, but you may need to refer it to the General Services Committee or indeed the full council in order to directly contact the Department of Transport, but I'll leave those details to you.
That's fine, thank you. Anyone else? Anything else to add to the work programme? No, I think that is everything for the work programme. Thank you very much, everyone. And with that, unless there's anything else anyone would like to add? No, then that concludes the business of the meeting this evening. I now declare the meeting closed at 18:43. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.